What happens when a cruise ship's detour turns into one of the most expensive maritime disasters in history? Welcome to the Costa Concordia saga. I'm Leah, feeling fascinated and very ready to dig into this one today.
I'm Garrett, and I'm curious and kind of excited to explore how this all unfolded at sea.
Today it's the Costa Concordia disaster and the massive salvage that followed from 2012 to 2017.
Quick story before we get rolling. I took a cruise once with some friends, and the safety drill felt routine. Life jackets, muster stations, counting off by cabin. I remember wondering if people actually pay attention. After reading about Concordia, I kept replaying that drill and imagining how it would work if the lights went out and the deck was at an angle. That contrast stuck with me.
Let's open the book on this. Costa Concordia was a cruise ship that, in January 2012, deviated close to shore near Isola del Giglio, Italy. It struck a charted reef called La Scole, tore open its port side below the waterline, and partially capsized. 32 people died that night and in the days that followed. A salvage diver later died in 2014 during recovery work. It became a defining maritime disaster of the 2010s.
A few quick terms so we're speaking the same language. A sail-by salute is basically a close pass near shore for show, like taking a risky shortcut to wave at the coastline. Parbuckling is a way to roll a capsized or heeled ship upright using cables and controlled ballast. Think of gently pulling a heavy bookshelf back to vertical with winches. And sponsons are big external flotation tanks you bolt onto the hull to help refloat it, like attachable water wings for a ship.
That risky shortcut analogy is perfect. The normal route off Giglio stays much farther offshore. In 2011, there had been a daylight sail passed with company approval, but in 2012 it was at night, closer, and missing those formal safeguards.
All right, let's set the stage for the beginning of the night. In January 2012, Costa Concordia left Civitavecchia for a 7-day cruise with more than 4,200 people aboard. The captain, Francesco Schettino, detoured to pass near Isola del Giglio. Charts showed the reef area La Scole, with a rock called Scola Piccola marking the outer hazard. Around 2142 to 2145, the hull struck that reef, tearing long ribbons of steel from the port side.
Schettino later said he had turned off a navigation alarm and was navigating by sight. Why turn it off near charted rocks at night? Disabling alarms removes a safety layer that could nudge you to correct earlier. Investigators emphasize that bridge resource management works best with redundancy: radar, electronic charts, alarms, and eyes. He also admitted ordering the turn too late after seeing breakers on the reef.
After impact, flooding raced through compartments and into the engine rooms. Generators and engines went down, so propulsion and even emergency power were lost. Picture being in a skyscraper when all lights cut out and the building starts tilting. Your signs, your elevators, your communications all get dicey at once.
And early announcements to authorities and passengers framed it as an electrical issue. At 22:12, an officer told the Port of Livorno harbormaster there was a blackout. Passengers were told things were under control and in some cases to return to cabins. That framing cost time as the list grew. Around 22:26, Schettino finally told authorities the ship had taken water through an opening on the port side.
There were also unusual dynamics on the bridge. The maitre d'hotel, a native of Giglio, and Dominica Semortan, a Moldovan dancer who later said she was romantically involved with the captain, were present during the approach. It's not that their presence alone caused the crash, but investigators questioned distractions and discipline in a critical moment.
Meanwhile, about 600 passengers had boarded that day and had not yet had the muster drill. A muster drill is that quick safety briefing about routes and life jackets. It was allowed to be scheduled later, but in a fast-moving emergency at night, not knowing your station magnifies confusion.
As the ship drifted, it eventually grounded unevenly on a rocky ledge near Punta Gabbianara. By about 2244, it had heeled dramatically to starboard. And here's the brutal geometry problem. When a ship lists that far, the lifeboats on the high side become nearly impossible to deploy. davits jam, lowering paths are obstructed, and gravity is not your friend. That makes the timing of any abandoned ship order critical.
The abandoned ship order came around 2250. Some crews hesitated to lower lifeboats because the vessel was still moving slightly and the heel was growing. Passengers jumped, helicopters were winching from the slanted decks, and local boats swarmed to help. Italian Coast Guard, Navy, and Air Force helicopters cycled hoists all night. That improvisation saved lives once the angles got extreme.
Bridge leadership faltered. A recorded call later captured Captain Gregorio de Falco, a Coast Guard officer in Livorno, ordering Schettino repeatedly to return to the ship. Schettino had already left the vessel by around 2330. He later claimed he fell into a lifeboat. That exchange became the quote everyone remembers, and it weighed heavily later in court.
Diver rescues and searches in the following days were hazardous. Interiors were pitch black, with floating furniture and shifting debris. Teams worked in pairs for planned 50-minute dives, staging extra air tanks and tying down obstacles. They even used small explosive charges to open access routes. It is hard to overstate how disorienting a tilted, flooded ship is on the inside.
While rescues continued, environmental concerns spiked. Giglio sits within the Pelagos Sanctuary, a protected Mediterranean area for marine mammals. Officials established exclusion zones and oil booms. The European Maritime Safety Agency had the response vessel Salina Bay on standby. ISPRA, Italy's environmental institute, sent its ship Estrella for water and seabed surveys. High winds even popped the booms once, letting some oily sheen escape, so they reinforced the barriers.
Once the immediate pollution threat was addressed, defueling began in February 2012. Salvors used hot tapping, which is just warmed oil out from upper valves while pumping seawater into lower valves to keep the ship stable. Why seawater in? Because if you only pull oil, you change buoyancy and trim, and the hull could shift on the ledge. By March 2012, they had removed thousands of tons of fuel with no major spill.
And in a nice touch for the local habitat, about 200 Pinna nobilis fan mussels, a protected species, were relocated by hand to keep them away from silt and equipment. Small detail, big signal that the site was ecologically sensitive.
With fuel out, the conversation turned to removal. Early on, Franco Gabrielli, Italy's civil protection head, said they would remove the ship whole rather than cut it up on site. Why choose that harder path? Cutting in place spreads debris and pollutants across a tourist island. Whole ship removal protects the environment, but demands extraordinary engineering.
So who took charge? Enter Titan Salvage and Michael Perry, selected in April 2012. Their plan: stabilize the wreck on a man-made underwater platform, parbuckle it upright with strand jacks and ballasted sponsons, then bolt on starboard sponsons, dewater them, and refloat. Nick Sloan, the salvage master, coordinated from a base at Civitavecchia. Weather windows and hull movement were constant wild cards.
The parbuckling itself began in September 2013. They inched it under 2 degrees per hour, sometimes admitting seawater into port sponsons to help the roll. By the early hours of September 2013, the ship stood upright on the artificial seabed. Inspections showed the starboard side was badly crushed. Salvage costs had already soared past hundreds of millions of euros by then.
Once upright, the next big move was the starboard sponsons and the refloat in July 2014. They pumped water from those tanks in stages to lift the hull free of the platform, nudged it offshore, and started the slow tow to Genoa in July 2014, arriving a few days later. Along the way and after mooring, additional remains were found and identified, bringing closure to families still waiting.
In Genoa, dismantling took until July 2017. Roughly 53,000 tons of material were recycled. The designation had been a constructive total loss, meaning repair would cost more than the ship was worth. After the hull was gone, there was still post-wreck remediation at Giglio, removing the platforms, anchor blocks, grout bags, and cleaning the seabed well into 2018.
Switching gears to the legal and financial fallout, Schettino was convicted of manslaughter and got a 16-year sentence. The company offered passengers up to 11,000 euros. About a third accepted, others pursued separate claims. The salvage alone cost about $1.2 billion, and total disaster costs neared $2 billion. That's staggering for a single incident.
There is a lasting question I can't let go of. How did the ship end up exactly on that ledge? Was it deliberate beaching, or did the wind just push it there after propulsion died? On one hand, Schettino argued he steered toward shallow water to save lives. On the other, the Italian Coast Guard chief later testified that prevailing winds may have carried the ship to Punta Gabbianara. I kind of lean toward the wind drift explanation, given the power loss and chaos.
I hear that. I lean a bit the other way, maybe not full credit, but I could see a partially controlled glide. Even without engines, rudder angle and residual momentum can do a little work for a short window. If he put the helm over before the blackout fully bit, the ship might have already been arcing. The wind could have completed the job, but the initial intent may have nudged the outcome.
Why does that distinction matter to you? For me, either way, the initial decision to go that close at night and disable alarms overshadows later moments.
Fair point. I guess I focus on it because it helps explain the final casualty numbers. If the ledge prevented a full deep water sinking, then even partial intent could have influenced survival. But yeah, the earlier choices created the crisis. And with a multinational, service-heavy crew, language and training gaps meant leadership clarity was everything.
We also saw how public perception formed around that phone call. Captain DeFalco's now famous order to return to the ship crystallized anger and a sense of duty violated. It is rare that a recorded exchange so starkly shapes a narrative. And then there's the bizarre soundtrack. People reported hearing "My Heart Will Go On" in the dining hall near the time of impact. That eerie echo of Titanic just stamped itself on memory.
Counterfactual time. What if Schettino had not disabled the navigation alarm and stuck with the standard offshore route? Honestly, the ship almost certainly misses Les Scoles. No catastrophic breach, no blackout cascade, no listing geometry nightmare. That one-layered defense, the alarm, could have nudged an earlier turn.
And then we probably never see parbuckling on this scale, right? No underwater platform city built on a slope, no sponsons the size of buildings bolted to a cruise liner. Engineering loses a very expensive case study. Giglio avoids years of remediation. The recorded call never happens. Public consciousness does not latch onto that go back aboard moment.
Safety culture ripple effects are interesting too. Without the disaster, the pushback against casual close-coast salutes might have been weaker. The industry still values drills and bridge discipline, but the urgency may have been dialed down. We would not have this textbook example of what happens when redundancy is bypassed and timing slips.
Another what if, earlier abandoned ship. If an order had gone out before the starboard heel became severe, more davits on the high side might have been usable. Some experts argue launching while moving is risky, so I get the hesitation. But I keep circling back to those golden minutes when communications downplayed the breach. Clarity then might have translated into more boats away earlier.
Staying curious about the why behind each decision point really changes how this story lands. From alarms to musters to that wild parbuckling, every layer mattered.
Totally. Big engineering, human choices, and fragile coastlines all braided together. That's the heartbeat of it for me.
All right, that ties it up nicely. Stay curious.